Testing, 1, 2, check in. Good deal. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. For those who are watching online, welcome to Feature Forum. Pastor Tim here with Pastor Trent. It's good to be in the house of the Lord this morning. And I'm just trying to think of a quick little question or something. What'd you do this weekend, Trent? Anything special?
Yesterday we had a wedding to go to, so did a wedding down in Sydney. Hung out with the family a little bit for the reception and watched a little bit of the Buckeyes last night. That's about it.
That was a late game, huh? Did they win?
Yeah, they won pretty easily. Took on Wisconsin. So.
Okay, well, good. That's a Big Ten, right? Or is that Big 12?
Big Ten.
Sorry.
Big Ten.
Far from football, it feels like sometimes. Anyhow, hey, glad you guys are watching online, and we're just been discussing the topic of identity and crisis identity for the past couple weeks here. What we mean by crisis identity specifically, we're talking about exploring sexual identity from a Christian perspective, realizing that it is a crisis that is seen throughout our culture at large, and what's this really mean for us? 2 weeks ago, we talked about just the word identity itself, and what does that really even mean? We get that word identity from the Latin word from identical, which means same. And this idea of you're the same, you're consistent under any circumstance or location that you enter in, you are the same person, you are the same identity in a sense. So that's what we mean by identity. In our culture today, it also could mean like self-worth, your value, right? Where that stems from. And we talked about every man, woman, and child, no matter what platform you're in, is seeking for that identity, right? Do you want to touch on that just briefly, kind of what that looks like? We talk about two foundations.
Right, the consistency of that.
Yeah.
So I think, I'd really just reiterate what you're saying, Tim, there of I think God wants us to be after an identity that really is rooted in Him, that's unchanging in all spaces. So a lot of times, maybe somebody will put forth the face of who they are in different ways, depending on who they're spending time with. So maybe I'm a little different person than I am on Sunday mornings in church versus Saturday night at the party or the wedding that I was at last night. Like that can be a temptation, right? Or in the workplace, I put on this front of, I'm a hard leader who's, taking a strong stand, but with my other buddies in the Christian sphere, I'm more laid back and down to earth, or maybe for younger people, it's I'm the jock and I'm the number one athlete, and so we try and take on all these different identities. I think what you're getting at is that oneness that consistency. That really transcends all different settings. It's in Christ, never changing.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like, and it starts at a young age, right?
Yeah.
A child is craving for identity. Yesterday, my son, my grandpa showed up, right? They wanted to watch my son Jonah play some football. And Jonah's like, no, grandpa, I don't want to watch. They can't. I don't want to have them to watch me play football. I don't want them to see me. And he got all embarrassed. He's like, no. Like, make sure they don't say anything or yell anything or any of that.
Yeah.
Well, what's really going on there is that there's a little bit of an identity, in a sense, tension there with my son, right? He wants to fit in to his friends. He wants to be athletic and make sure that he has value and self-worth there. And maybe having grandpa there is cracking at that sense of self-esteem, right?
Yeah.
Because he wants to be included, wants to fit in. There's a little bit of a symptom, a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about. It starts at a young age, my brother. And it runs across the board to adults today. And why do we want to talk about this, Trent? Why don't you touch on that? Why do we want to talk about identity in the first place?
Yeah, and I think even here specifically sexual identity, which is where we're headed with all this, and I think the reasons we want to talk about it is, one, it's rampant in our society, just the conversation that surrounds sexual identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, which we'll get into, and the differences there, some of the nuances. I heard this week in a Gallup poll that our teenagers, up to 20% of them are in some way identifying with the LGBT movement and just wrestling with that. That doesn't mean they've decided that they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgendered, but they're wrestling with that reality because of how frequently it's being communicated. Another thought that was shared this week, got to listen to Mark Yarhouse, who's one of the leading Christian evangelists, psychologists, and specializes on sexual identity. And he said one thing that needs to be offered to anybody wrestling with those issues is a true sense of identity and community. So identity and community, and I think that's two things that the church really has to offer, is a strong sense of identity and also community. So anybody watching online, we want to be able to offer that of just someone to walk alongside of. I think oftentimes the church takes this posture of either attack or retract completely. Both of them probably driven out of fear. Or even a sense of spiritual pride.
That's good. Like, I know one book I've been reading is seeing people not as an issue, but as people themselves.
That's good.
Creating the image and likeness of God. And I think that's so foundational when we perceive and understand who people are, where they're coming from, why they are where they're at today. I see this note here, John 3:17, like God came to not condemn the world, but to save the world through his son, Jesus. So Jesus, and we'll get to this next week, I think, Jesus and how he interacted with people. He saw people made in the image of God. He didn't see the issue first or their lifestyle. He went past that and saw people that were made in the image, that had a heart, that had emotions, that had feelings, right? That have a family, that have lives just like us.
Yeah.
That we need to interact with and engage with.
That's good. Yep.
Yeah. I'll let you touch on this in terms of who is this for? Everyone asks, where is not so much my struggle, but where is my temptation sexually? So now we're kind of narrowing the playing field a little bit here with sexual temptation.
Right.
You want to touch on that there?
Yeah, so who's our conversation for today? You're watching online, wondering where we're headed. Really, at a fundamental level, I'd say it's for everybody because all of us are created as sexual beings, right? So we're all prone to temptation and in different ways, whether that's and to different levels. Some people it's really got a hold of. Other people maybe they don't have to battle those sexual temptations quite as aggressively, or even just day to day, hour to hour for some people if it's become an addiction. So I'd say it's for all people to a certain extent. Today we really want to head in the direction of the LGBT community and just people wrestling with some of those issues. So
and we did want to touch base, in terms of this temptation struggle. Why is it a struggle a little bit? We want to touch on, there's a passage in Romans 2 that's very apologetic in nature when it says that God basically put within our DNA a conscience to know right from wrong. It's built within us. And so this is a conscience that's given by God to help direct us to know what is right and what is wrong. Our lifestyle and our choices can sear that conscience, can numb that conscience, right? Like, don't touch that, over a period of time. Like, if you don't tell your kids to hey, what you do there is wrong, right? If they're lying or if they're stealing, right? Eventually, over time, like they're gonna be numb to that reality of their own conscience, that what they're doing is wrong, and so it's important to parent in that way. But my point is that there is a built-in conscience within us if we're going to be completely honest and vulnerable. And the struggle, what we mean by that temptation struggle sexually, is this idea that if we're walking outside of God's boundaries, maybe the design that's even within us, even if you don't believe there's a God, there's probably a design within you to know right from wrong. I mean, if you're watching online, you would probably all agree that lying is wrong, right? If you steal, that would be wrong. You would point to the person, hey, that person is a thief, right? They did something wrong. Like, all of us would agree that there is some absolute moral code that's within us, that we function out of. And so this struggle of temptation, this temptation struggles would be that maybe we could be falling out of line from that moral code that's within us, right? And that making us feel maybe shame or guilt or a lack of peace, right? Because we've fallen out of line. And that goes not just for anybody on the spectrum, right? We're not specifying a specific group, but anybody on the struggle of sexual temptation and so forth on that wide spectrum within our culture today. And so from there, we're trying to find identity, right? We're trying to find meaning and satisfaction. A lot of times, I had this as an example, it's from our sexual identity that we find our identity. So our appetite for sex or for that craving to be satisfied. You think of a teenage woman, right, who doesn't grow up with a father that loves them and watches and just kind of walks with her as she develops. Well, what typically happens is she's going to go looking, for another man, right? And maybe a man doesn't really respect her and love her and really care for her, but she's going to have this tendency to grab a hold of somebody. Why? Because she's probably maybe wanting some physical, but more than that, there's an emotional vacancy that's within her, and she's trying to fulfill that to give her a sense of identity, right? That she is beautiful, that she is loving, that she is valued, right? And so the same thing goes for a man. We talked about this last week. A man, at a young age, he's trying to impress the girls in a sense, right? To quote unquote, I don't know if this is bad jargon used, but get in the pants type of thing, right? And it's this idea of like, hey, I want to be a man's man. Right. I want to show up and tell people who I really am and my identity as being a man. And that look at all these girls I know on Facebook, or look what my relationship with my girlfriend is. What we do and so forth. So there is that sense of pleasure, but even deeper than that, there's a sense of identity that we're trying to hold up.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. But let's continue on here. Let's go into, we talked about last week the crisis of our sexual crisis that's going on. 40 million people struggle with pornography in America today, which that's a lot. Sex trafficking is rampant, going on. 45 million people are enslaved to that within the world itself. Obviously, we have continued cases of rape. Premarital sex, this was interesting, we touched on last week. Age 20, 75% of Americans at age 20 are entertaining premarital sex. But as we continue on here, there seems to be a gender confusion. There's an isolation. There's an uncertainty, fear, and doubt, and anger with even gender confusion. Do you want to address that there a little bit, where we're going there?
Yeah, so where are you at here,
Right
Tim?
there, yeah, right there today.
What we're addressing today?
Yeah.
So today, really, we want to get into just laying a foundation for some of the terminology even, just for the LGBT community, just identifying terms, and also using that as a springboard to dialogue about maybe some of the common questions that come up, and addressing that just from a biblical perspective.
And we want to encourage those who are watching online, and maybe you're in that place in which you do struggle. This is not. We're not here like we're the experts.
Right. Yeah.
We're a few guys,
We're learning.
Rural guys, from the community. We're here learning as you are, and this is an ongoing conversation because we want to keep the door open, right? The church is a door that's supposed to be open for everyone, and to have these conversations that are formative and speaking truth in love. Yeah. And so this is a dialogue more than anything today. But let's talk about definitions and just kind of go through the list, because that's so important for us to clarify definitions, to know that we are on the same page as to what we're discussing here. So do you want to start touching on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of these listed down here. We'll try and move somewhat quickly through the definition piece, get into some common questions, and we do invite questions. If you're online, you can submit questions as well for people in the sanctuary here. We'll get to some Q&A time at the end as well, hopefully. But maybe just starting with biological sex. So what that is would be just when we are born, the physical makeup of our body. So that's really even biological sex is being discussed and is debated in some ways, which is hard to believe. I think just to remove that terminology, really it takes away everything to work from. But our understanding of biological sex would be the sex that you are assigned at birth, male or female, dependent on your biological makeup, the physical nature of your body. The next one there, gender identity. I'll comment on this one, then pass it off to you, Tim. Just gender identity would be more how a person experiences themselves within that sex. So maybe I'm assigned male at my birth based on my biological makeup, but I experience myself, or I feel as if I experience myself more as a female. That would be my identity. I identify as a female despite my biological sex. So sexual orientation.
Yeah, sexual orientation would be the nature of a person's attraction. So whether towards men, women, or both. So that's kind of your probably your nature. That's probably the key word. Is identified and measured. Here's a couple notes here. Is identified and measured by your sexual arousal. Evidence in physical, including genital response. Awareness of what turns you on based on history of sexual behaviors, thoughts, and feelings. So this is sexually how you're oriented based on some things that you can almost measure about your life history. Right? What turns you on, what kind of arouses you, those type of things attribute to a person's sexual orientation.
Good.
And then you have this phrase that we want to kind of parse out a little bit. It can just be used as a phrase that maybe not a lot of people understand, let alone wanting to understand. And I think culture sometimes has pushed this phrase maybe too much. Without really parsing out what do these words even mean. When we're talking about the LGBTQ community and just those words in themselves, I just want to do something that was very interesting, a history on LGBT. It started actually in the 1920s in the gay pride kind of movement, and I think I'm bringing this up to bear because I think it brings some sense of compassion and understanding as to And maybe it's turned a little bit in an unhealthy direction in terms of too far, but in terms of the roots, there's some things here that can kind of help us give a better understanding of where this came from. The history is that in 1920s, a person who was attracted to the same sex was meant to live in secret that could destroy your life if it was known. So in 1920, that was unlawful in a sense. That was seen as being completely bad. Psychiatry said that you were sick, and the law said that you were. Some laws would say that you were a criminal at that time, and this was true up to the late 60s and early 70s. And what really launched this movement, the gay rights movement, is the Stonewall riots. And in June 28, 1969, 9 detectives entered into a gay bar in New York's Greenwich Village called Stonewall Inn. And their intent was to clear the bar for selling liquor without license. That's what the history says. But we've got to remember, these people were seen as being less than, right? Marginalized people. So there might have been an alternative motive. And they ejected 200 patrons from that inn, arrested 3 transvestite customers. It escorted them, and an angry crowd was outside, and 400 of them threw rocks and bottles at the police. And this repeated the next night, the crowd chanting, "Legalize gay bars, gay is good." Fire started, bottles thrown again. 4 nights later, 500 strong marched and shouted, marched and shouted. And then from that point, they saw that they were a mistreated minority. And they were assaulted with no reason besides sheer prejudice. Ignored at times in the legal process, sometimes unreasonably harassed by police. These were called the Stonewall riots. After that time, activist groups from the gay community formed and rose up, first in New York and then nationwide, which you hear that in the 1960s there was the term the gay power, birthed alongside of black power, right, and flower power. Stonewall was the origins of the gay rights movement today, which is also defined as the LGBTQ community. I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, some of the background there.
Yeah.
That's good.
The LGBTQ is also an exclusive, so we've got kind of the history that I shared, and obviously it's a culture in of itself, a community on the move in a way, but it's also just a term that's used, an umbrella term, to describe prominent sexual minorities, okay? So you've got lesbian, that's with the L, you've got G as gay, you've got B as bisexual, T as transgender, Q as queer, but a lot of times it's this understanding of questions, right, which you kind of touched on, right? People are, they don't know where they're at in the spectrum.
And I think that's a really important issue. A lot of this is how many people that are wrestling with sexual identity, gender identity, of really including a piece of that Q element of questioning. There's a lot of going back and forth and navigating over years of their life. So,
yeah, that's good. Let's just kind of just touch on a little bit of these different subgroups.
Yeah.
Lesbian comes from Lesbos, a Greek island, and it was in the 6th century, and it was with a poet named Sappho, and he wrote about the celebration of love between females. And so L signifies an approval and acceptance of same-sex attraction between a female and a female. We talk about gay. Gay, traditionally meaning happy, was a term that was common and broadly accepted reference to homosexuality, particularly between men. In 1970s, many pushed for its use, the word gay, as a replacement for the word homosexual, since gay had more of a positive connotation to it. Bisexual, a person who's sexually attracted to both sexes. not necessarily attracted to one sex as the other, but his or her attractions to both sexes are strong enough to constitute erotic and romantic responses to both. And then we've got transgender. Transgender is more of a broad umbrella term to designate a person whose identity does not conform to conventional notions of male or female, but combines or moves between these. It serves as, an umbrella term covering a number of sexual and gender variations. We could talk about, maybe we can get into more detail later, but cross-dressers, drag queens and drag kings, transsexuals, intersex, and so on from there. So,
Yeah. Transsexual would be a little different. So cross-dresser, drag queen fall under that transgender piece. Transsexual would be somebody who really believes they're born into the wrong body.
Yeah.
They have male physical components, but they really believe they're a woman and therefore want to pursue sex change either through medication or surgery.
Yeah, people would say, like, there's that phrase, trapped in the wrong body.
Right.
Would be a phrase that a lot of people who are transsexual would,
that's good.
would reiterate. Yeah.
Good.
Did we talk about, let me just mention this about drag queens or drag kings. These are people who dress in the opposite sex for the purpose of entertainment. Someone who is a drag, quote, unquote, temporarily adopt, this is good to understand, temporarily adopt clothing and mannerisms that he or she would not normally adopt in daily routine. Mm-hmm. So this is an individual who is probably oriented a certain way sexually, mm-hmm. but because of a circumstance or situation, mm-hmm. They adopt temporarily another dress code, right? Even mannerisms to express themselves in that moment.
One thing that came to mind as you were talking there, Tim, was I've heard people ask the question if I as a man I've had sexual interaction at any level or even sexual attraction to another man, does that mean I'm gay? And I think that's an example of some of what's hitting our younger generations of man, I'm a man. And I just had sexual interaction with another man. And maybe there was even physical arousal to that or something. So, like, am I gay? Mm-hmm. And I think there's an important piece there of no, maybe not, maybe so. This idea of I think people think that immediately they have some experience and it just end of story has sealed the deal. And it leads into this process of a lot of questioning and a lot of confusion, which then in many places in our culture now would lead to doctors, counselors prescribing puberty blockers to basically say, hey, let's just hold on here for a minute and let you work this out. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for people to understand one experience, one thought, even a season of experiences or thoughts doesn't mean that that's how things will play out. And actually the research would say most times it doesn't play out that way. A person's alignment, their gender alignment would come back in line with their sexual identity. So I just want to drop that in there. Like, we have those terminology, the terminology of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, but I wouldn't encourage anybody to run with that if they feel like, oh wow, he just described me because of what happened last week or because of what I've been thinking the last 3 months.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So just clarifying some of that.
That is good. That's good. I saw some things here that I think would be good and helpful for if you're watching mm-hmm. online and you're maybe a person who is a lesbian or considering that, right? Mm-hmm. You're made in the image of God. You're loved and you're known by God. Mm-hmm. And this idea that overwhelming majority didn't choose their desires, we all choose actions. And so I think there's a little bit of a need there to kind of address, because I know some research would suggest that there is no, even scientists that, from my research, that there is no genetic like gene mm-hmm. per se of a person's from birth is oriented a certain way,
Right.
sexually. But at the same time, they would say that that nurture plays a role too in this too,
Yeah.
right? And so I would say that from my research that there is a nature and nurture mix that creates maybe one's choosing of sexual orientation. Would you? Would you?
Yeah, I
see
mean,
that
from
too?
what I've been hearing, so at some point, like everybody starts out I hope I'm getting this right, but like XX chromosomes, right? And then there's a testosterone wash that happens while baby is in fetus. I think during the second trimester or something, there's a wash of testosterone, and that is largely what affects how we come out, our sexual orientation, identify even as gender. And there are instances when that wash of testosterone won't be as full, or sometimes is even absent. So there are the exceptions where there's some really goofy things that happen, just scientifically and biologically. But that might play a factor into the question: is it nature or nurture? Am I born this way, or did I learn this behavior? I really think there are, and just through talking to individuals, hearing personal stories, like I don't think a lot of people wake up and choose and say, "Man, I'm a man, but I'm going to start loving men or being attracted to men." Like
Right.
That's not a conscious choice. And you can talk to people who are maybe from a Christian perspective that think living a gay lifestyle is not God honoring, and they'll tell you, like, I've prayed for this to go away. I want this to go away. I'm not choosing it. In fact, I'm trying to choose otherwise, but it's not leaving me. So I think, and there's a lot of people you can talk to who've been in that, because especially when the culture was rejecting it. But it didn't just disappear. So I don't think we have ability to just say, I'm going to be attracted to men, or I'm going to be attracted to women. So I think there's a combination there of scientific reasons and also a lot of experiential stuff around us, our environment, our parenting, sexual experiences. A lot of that is playing in and may really enhance it.
That's good. I did want to maybe kind of just touch on that a little bit more. Is that many feelings and desires that we think are inborn, but have actually been shaped more by our environment that we grew up in, which would be the quote nurture. In one of the books that I've done research, Preston Sprinkle, he shares about his cousin's experience as a missionary in the Papua New Guinea, and it talks about how she could have walked around without a shirt. And the native men wouldn't have batted an eye. But if she wore jeans in public, there's a good chance she would have aroused the men, and even if she wore a large coat to cover her chest. In that culture, woman's pelvic area, though covered in denim, is much more provocative than than other woman features. The point is that one's culture subconsciously influences our desires. Anthropologist Pat Chaplin says this: what people want and what they do in any society is to a large extent what they are made to want and allowed to do. Sexuality cannot escape its cultural connection. And that's so interesting to think that how much our culture, though I'm not dismissing that there is something inborn within us,
right,
or there's these feelings, these desires, right? It's a part of kind of our nature, and maybe we can get into the fall later and how that addresses that maybe. But the point is that culture does impact how we interact sexually, right? And what even arouses us sexually. I also want to point this out, is that in some cases, biology doesn't shape choices. Choices shape biology. Some of you would be like, whoa, what's going on here? The church might be like, come on, Tim, what are you talking about? But some of the research I looked at was that neuroscientists discovered that certain actions and habits can actually physically alter the shape of your brain, brain's plasticity. Alterations in neural pathways and synapses, which are due to changes in behavior, environment, neural processes. The brain actually changes over time. Neurons shift and grow. Chemical levels rise and fall depending on experiences, actions, and patterns acquired throughout the course of our lives. Like, for instance, take porn addicts. Those who struggle with porn, right? Excuse me. Their brain is altered if they're excessively using porn. Research has shown. And you look at the brain, it's the same thing as those who struggle with alcohol, right? Or any type of addiction. Such addiction is a byproduct of their anatomy, look at the brain. Such addiction is byproduct of their anatomy, but in actuality, their anatomy is the byproduct of their behavior, of their continual choices. Shape their mind, shape their anatomy itself, which is interesting.
What you're getting at there, to clarify, is if we did MRI imaging, you would see similarities from people who have addiction to pornography or addiction to alcohol. They could see that on an image, and it can change over time.
Right.
And I think I want to comment on that. I think that reality, maybe there's not a scientific understanding of that, but parents may, and maybe you're watching and you have a son or daughter who you feel is wrestling with, am I gay, am I transgendered, and there's a moment there, maybe a long stretch of time there where there's fear that comes in of, what do I do with this? I need to stop this. And I think that's what would go back from what Mark Yarhouse was saying. Most of what he's seen, and he lives in this environment, is that parents will overreact to try and stop that, because they don't want to continue to fuel that fire, if you will. And what he's saying is, more often than not, there's negative response to when you try and step in and just stop it to manufacture that. But up to 75% are just going to navigate that journey. You just walk alongside of them, and basically God's design in our body is going to take care of that. It's not always true, obviously, but not to freak out.
Yeah, and on that point, I was just with our brains and how they're altered by our choices. The point being is that it's hard to pin down same-sex attraction by the product of the way we are just born alone. If you include culture and you include our life choices that impact how we think over time, it's just not an inborn issue. Or a thing that's there. It's something that's based on culture and our choices.
Well, and they're doing research on brains that are, is there a male brain and a female brain? That's pretty hotly debated right now too, even within the LGBT community. Is somebody born with a male or female brain? But yeah. Well, we're going to go ahead and sign off of our online. We have some people coming in here to the sanctuary, but if you're watching online, glad that you've been with us. I want to invite you to continue the conversation. Send us an email. No matter where you're at in that journey, we'd love to talk to you. Whether you've identified with the LGBT community for years of your life, or maybe you're wrestling with it, we'd love to have that conversation, just to grow alongside you and to offer that back to what we'd said originally, just community and just seek after the Lord together.
Yeah, I want to encourage you also. I think next week we're going to talk about what does Jesus say to this, right? To you who's watching online, and hopefully be encouraging. And we just invite you to be a part of that as we journey with Jesus and how he would interact and what he would say.